Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I look at every classic Doctor Who series, plus a bunch of big Finnish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. And today, on the 29th of January 2020, I'm starting a look at the first anthology release from Big Finish, Circular Time. Before I begin, I'd like to say that because in 2019 YouTube was data mining children and the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act guidelines changed, I'd like to say that this video is not intended towards children. Doctor Who is a show that kids can watch, but these videos are from an adult perspective and potentially could be looking at adult themes, so viewer discretion is advised. But today, 29th January 2020, I'm starting to look at the first short story in the 4-story collection, Circular Time, Spring. Now, Circular Time is already an interesting one because it's an anthology. A lot of these anthologies will be, sometimes they have themes, sometimes they don't. This one has a theme. This theme is basically the 4 seasons. And each of the 4 stories is written by Paul Cornell and Mike Maddox. Now, Paul Cornell, this is the first thing we're covering by Paul Cornell. Cornell has written mostly, is mostly known for writing, Doctor Who books. He also, he also wrote a bunch of audios. This is the earliest chronological one that we're doing. Though not the first one that he wrote. I think this is one of his last ones that he actually wrote. But yeah, it is, this is a release. The first 2 stories were written by Mike Maddox. Second 2 were by Paul Cornell. So Spring is the first one. It's Mike Maddox's, and it is a story that very much represents it. I think each story is essentially going to be representing the season, and I think Spring does an excellent job of representing the season. The idea here is that the Doctor and Nyssa go on a mission to the Time Lords to find for a Time Lord who has gone native, Cardinal Zero, who was a member of the High Council, and he's apparently famous for doing stuff with regeneration, but he's a character who basically goes to this planet of basically avians, and basically becomes their ruler, introduces democracy, and it's interesting. The planet of these avians have this really, really interesting this really interesting idea of a legal system where they deal with they don't punish those who are it's one of those things where you have them basically punishing the family members instead of the actual person who committed a crime. And he's trying to get this changed. And he does this, and what's essentially is Spring is a time of rebirth. So the story actually ends with his regeneration into a Time Lord avian hybrid, where he's basically turns out this cardinal character, played excellently by Hugh Fraser, who has done quite a few, who will see his name come up again. I'm pretty sure he's been he was in War Against the Land and Trouble with Drax. He's been in a couple. We'll see him again in a couple more stories, especially Doctor Who stories. That we'll see more of him come the future, and I have to say, he also apparently was in The Smugglers in an uncredited role, so that's an interesting little tidbit. But the way he plays the character is really solid. He's manipulative. He's getting the Doctor, who does this like entire thing. There's this entire thing where where you have the story building to an ending, building up to the ending, and that's the entire theme. Really exploring. It's kind of like you have the Doctor sort of really taking away agency, and that's perhaps one of the big problems here, is that the Doctor isn't the hero. But it is definitely an interesting start to the story. Zero is interesting. The Avians are interesting. I think Mike Maddox does a good job of really doing a story where you get the feeling, you get a good feeling of what the story is, and of what what is what is the story doing. It's this big, it's this sort of big sort of plot that kind of comes together into an interesting enough ending, that the Doctor can't return, and this Cardinal Zero has basically set himself up as a new god, which is definitely an interesting way of ending the story, interesting way of getting the Doctor totally involved and totally out. But overall, Spring is just overall a solid story that's enjoyable. It has some interesting themes that I think maybe you could have explored a little better, and I think you could have explored the society more, even though the society was decently explored. It could have been done a little more, and a little more. It could be one of those stories where there's just a little more things going on to really what the story is doing, and what this whole plot is, and what the really what the story is trying to do is interesting. So overall, I'm going to give Spring an 8 out of 10. Alright, it's the 30th of January 2020. I just finished listening to Summer, the second short story in Circular Time, the anthology series. This one, obviously, thematically, deals with summer, hot, long days, relaxing, and it's, being out and having fun, interacting, and this one summer is a season where spring is the season of rebirth, summer is the season of growth, and sort of continuing. It's sort of the growth of the year. You have, crops getting harvest, you're basically getting a net gain. And this story actually reflects that pretty well. the story itself has the Doctor and Nyssa begin locked up in the Tower of London, and we mostly are concerned actually with Sir Isaac Newton, played by the amazing David Warner. Now, this isn't the first time we've had David Warner in Doctor Who. He was in. He played the villainous Cuthbert through several Fourth Doctor adventures. And this he was in The Rose Mariners way back with the Second Doctor. So he's been around. This is oddly enough his only appearance in the main range, though this isn't the last time we'll be seeing him. He's done quite a bit more with Big Finish throughout the years, and some of which we will be covering very much in the future. Here, he plays several different characters, but here he's playing Sir Isaac Newton, and as Sir Isaac Newton, he plays the role with this absolute fervor, brimming with intelligence, but also ever so slightly insane. Like, he's able to the whole. This is very much a story of misunderstanding. The whole plot actually only starts because the Doctor accidentally has some modern and futuristic money given in tender in the time of Newton. Newton notices and has him locked in the tower for counterfeiting. And it's absolutely great. So, and basically, the entire episode is watching as the Doctor's trying to outsmart Newton by being an idiot, and failing. Yeah, this is clearly a matter of the Doctor trying to, outsmart Isaac Newton of all people, Sir Isaac Newton, by basically acting dumber than him, trying to make him off the beaten track, and failing miserably. Part of the genius of this story is Isaac Newton basically being to figure out where human history is going, basically up until the Dalek invasion of Earth, all from some coins, because he recognizes the symbols of the coins. He recognizes and he also just generally recognizes that, okay, here we have here we have things from the Americas. We have like images of the moon being colonized. So you have just this you have this very, very intelligent man, getting his ideas, basically, as best as he can, but as he does it, he not only figures out, okay, this is how they do it, but also this is very much a story of them figuring out the ending, and figuring out that, hey, we have this, he figures out, this is the future, and then basically starts to figure out the mechanics of time travel. The story itself is basically an exercise in building intelligence, expanding your knowledge, being sort of a quote-unquote harvest, if you will, for the characters. And because of that, it's simply a fascinating, it is a fascinating story, because of this. This is just, it is, a really, really solid, a solid adventure because of it. You really get to see what goes on in Isaac Newton's head. You get to see what goes on in the Doctor's head. And you really do get to see that the character, that the Doctor can be outsmarted. There's also some really interesting stuff that's revealed about what the first Doctor's done. Obviously, what's nice, they reference the whole old Tom Baker thing of the Doctor dropping apples on Newton's head to get him to discover gravity. And the Fifth Doctor makes this very British excuse for it. I always was a good bowler, or something or something to that effect, which I think is just hilarious, because it really does show how much the Fifth Doctor is different from the Fourth, but how much he's still very clearly the Doctor, and it's this very, very nice sort of dichotomy, doing just giving you enough of interest and enough there to really get your teeth into the story. So I really do enjoy. I really did enjoy that aspect of it. Also, just Nyssa has some great stuff. Slight flaw: some things seem a little choppy in the short story format, but I enjoyed the story more than Spring, most definitely. It was, you have some great performances. It's a great character piece, and it just demonstrates an example of doing, really good Doctor Who. It's not the absolute most amazing story you could have, but it's good. It gets the job done, and it does some interesting things. So overall, I'm going to give Summer a 9 out of 10. It is the 31st of January, 2020, and I just finished listening to Autumn, the third episode of Circular Time, and the first one to be exclusively written by Paul Cornell. I know Cornell had basically co-written the first two, but these are the ones where he... These are the ones he basically written himself. And you can tell, because you really... This is most definitely a Paul Cornell story. It's much more small scale than his other stories. He's not really doing... he's not really doing a story it's a character-driven story that is the that just is one of those things where you have the story going, you have the story going to basically explore explore a lot of stuff with the Doctor and with Nyssa. Like, this is a story where you have this is one of those stories where you have the plot itself where you have the plot itself built around Nyssa writing a book and the Doctor playing cricket. This isn't... It's weird, because this isn't like some absolutely crazy sort of story where, where you get the story kind of just going on, going on what the on what the story is doing. It's a it's this tiny little thing where you have the plot as it stands, as it stands, this is finishing a book and falling in love with this guy called Andrew. And in keeping with the theming of the story being autumn, there's you get that you get a sense that nothing is really going well for Nyssa. Like, she's having she's having the story be a one of those stories where there's just the the completion and a story that just kind of ends for the characters. It's genuinely actually quite sad because the doctor isn't the main focus. Nyssa's trying to basically write of her experiences on Traken, and she's slowly falling in love and just sort of coming to terms with emotions and that the world isn't perfect, that the universe isn't perfect. Because it's partially an exploration of hers coming from Traken, which is which is a society that is based completely on everyone being totally nice to each other, and by traveling with the doctor, she's basically found herself in a way where it's like, hey, all I get, all she gets is the world, coming around and coming right to the story. So it's one of those things. It's one of those things where you just you get the story. It is telling something very, 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 very sad and very, very and something very basically hard to deal with. And it does end kind of tragically. It ends almost like it just gives you the feeling about them that the leaves are falling. We're getting close to the end of the year, and you kind of don't want the year to be over. It's definitely a different different sort of things where you have it. So, it's a good sort of story where you have you have the plot overall. So overall, I am going to give Circular Time Autumn a 10 out of 10. It's the 1st of February 2020, and I just finished listening to Winter, the final episode of Circular Time. And I have to say, it's an episode that I love, personally. It's an episode, one that's always just going to have a special place, because it fully represents winter being as a season of death and almost the prelude to the rebirth of spring. The whole idea is that this release as an anthology is a cycle. It's a cycle through the seasons. Not a literal cycle, of course, but a more metaphorical cycle. You had sort of the naive adventure with spring, or maturing adventure with summer, the older adventure with Autumn, and now with Winter, you have, well, you have something very, very different. You have a story about essentially the characters. You have a story where essentially the characters are, well, are dying. This doesn't take place anywhere near the other ones. This story takes place after the Caves of Androzani, which is the final Fifth Doctor story. The story, we will eventually get to it. And this is an episode that is steeped in lore. And I have to say, steeping it in that lore is a great, it's a great way of getting the story out there and getting the story to work. It's not like your standard story where you have, characters just, going around doing nothing. No, the whole idea here is that the Doctor is dying. He is, and throughout it he's basically, the Master has put him in sort of this mental state where it's been able to influence his TARDIS because of Planet of Fire, which we'll talk about all that when we get to those stories. But in this mental state, the Doctor has basically found himself in a state where he really can't win. It's one of those stories. He's, been taken, the Master has him trapped, and in having him trapped, there is that real danger of everything. It is definitely, it's a danger that you can feel, and a danger that you see happening. You see the Doctor being there, being a character that just that knows, kind of knows that he's going to die. He's not trying to avoid it. He just, is letting it happen, letting himself essentially succumb to this idea of, of these characters. It's definitely a sad, it's definitely kind of a sad state of affairs for the Doctor. He's trying to have a life where he can save everyone, but he can't. He's, in this hellscape, and it's winter, and he's dying, and Nyssa has to save him. Now, the plot is simple. I won't deny that. It's a very simple plot, and you may think that because the plot is so simple that there isn't nearly as much to enjoy there, but I'm actually going to heavily disagree, because with a simplistic plot like this, you really do get the chance to understand what the Doctor's going through, and what it means for the character to be in this situation. The Doctor's trying to find a way to survive. He's trying to live. He's trying to beat the Master at his own game. He's been using. This is also one of the few things where you actually see Chameleon as a character, who again we will have. The honest, the honest nature, of the character, and it's excellent. And it's really quite sad. You see Nyssa being happy, and this is basically saying goodbye to Peter Davison. This is a story that very much it ends, and it is really, really good. So overall, I'm going to give Circular Time Winter another 10 out of 10, and request that you listen to it. This story alone makes the anthology release worth it. That being said, we add up the scores, and I was about to give Circular Time a final score of 9.25 out of 10. Honestly, this is a strong release. It's one that you should listen to. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, hit the bell so you get notified when I upload, because this has been incredibly fun, and I'll see you next time when we actually move into the reign of Nicholas Briggs for Big Finish, for the 5th Doctor and Nyssa eras, with Renaissance of the Daleks.